Uh, Good morning, good afternoon, and thank you all for making time to attend the Chinese American Librarians Association's webinar, Obtaining Library Grants, a panel discussion with grant recipients. Happy Friday. I hope everyone's doing well. My name is Ray Pan, pronouns are he and him, and I am the CALA president 2022 to 2023 and the host of this webinar. I'm so excited to bring a group of stellar professionals to talk about their projects and their accomplishments in terms of grants, and to bring this up into conversation with everyone here. So just a few things here. You're welcome to have your cameras off, stay mute while we go through this Q&A panel discussion. The webinar is being recorded, so in case you wanted to check it again, you can watch it through the CALA YouTube channel. And during the conversation, feel free to drop any resources in the chat box or share advice, or if you have questions, feel free to drop them as well. You can also direct message me in the chat box if you have questions you want to bring up at the end. So thank you again. So before we get started, let's just take a moment here to share in the chat box. Where are you located now? Feel free to put that in the chat box, share with us your name and your workplace or affiliation. Great, we got folks out in California, in Missouri, in Indiana, in New York, in Florida, Ohio, North Carolina, Oklahoma. It's great to see so many folks throughout the country. Yeah, welcome everyone. So this is also a chance for us to just to get to know where everyone's coming from. And also I know there are folks who are just signing in right now, so they'll be able to pick up from here. Great, thanks for sharing where folks are coming from. So we're gonna proceed into the next slide. So in case you're not familiar, CALA is the Chinese American Librarians Association. It is a nonprofit organization, a volunteer-run library association focused on three main objectives. First is to enhance communication among Chinese American librarians, as well as between Chinese and Chinese American librarians and other librarians, and to foster that network in supporting professional development opportunities, and to promote China-American librarianships and library services, and to provide a vehicle whereby Chinese American librarians may collaborate with other associations and organizations with similar interests. So this coming year, 2023, CALA will be turning 50, and it's the 50th anniversary. So we're really excited about that. And in case you're aware of it, CALA is a National Librarians of Color Association, also known as NALCO, a member of the Joint Council of Librarians of Color, known as JCLC, which there will be a conference coming up in October in Florida. If you're attending, you get to meet some CALA folks there. And CALA is also a member of the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions, known as IFLA, and an affiliate of the American Library Association, which if you attend ALA annual conferences, you'll see conferences, programs by CALA as well. And we have members across North America, so in the United States, as well as Canada, as well as parts of Asia, including China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, Macau, and Australia. And the members are always so focused on doing research projects, programs, and very engaged globally. And you can find out more through cala-web.org. So we have amazing panelists today to talk about their experiences working on grant projects, getting grant funding for their projects. And I'm just so excited and delighted that they all were able to agree to do this in the middle of August, like right before this, for the academic folks, right before the busy school semester kicking in. And so I'm really thankful for Lily, Cindy, and Anna for agreeing to do this. So we'll just do self-introductions here. So I'll first pass off to Lily.
Hello, everybody. My name is Lily Luo, and I'm currently a full professor at the School of Information at San Jose State University. And it's great to be here. Thank you, Ray, for inviting me to be on this panel.
Great, thank you. Cindy?
Hello, everyone. I'm Cindy Hall, she, her, Wea, Director of Branch Operations at the Kansas City Public Library and Treasurer of the Freedom to Read Foundation. I am a proud Spectrum Scholar from 2016 and past president of the American Indian Library Association. I'm also a CALA member. Nice to see you.
Thanks, Cindy. Anya?
Hi, everyone. My name is Anna Ndumu. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Maryland. And my work looks at immigrants and information. I just realized I'm not a member of CALA, so that's in order right after this. But I'm very, very involved in Reforma and the Black Caucus of ALA. I identify as an Afro-Latina, and I'm happy to be here. Genuine thanks to CALA and Ray for inviting me.
Great. So now we're going to move on to the Q&A portion. So the first question we have is, what is your experience with the grant writing process? So many of us are starting or thinking about something, right? But we're just like, well, we're probably curious on maybe the past grants you've gotten and maybe some collaborators, if you want to talk about that. So we'll start with Lily.
Well, the grants that I received are closely connected with my research and teaching interests. I teach and conduct research primarily in the areas of academic librarianship, health information services, and the research methods education. So my grant projects mostly focused on these areas. And most of my grants came from two funders. Internally, from San Jose State University, as an academic institution, we do have a lot of funding opportunities for faculty internally. So that's one major source of my funding. Another one externally is from Imls, the one major funder for our discipline, for our field. So that's basically my grant experience in a nutshell. I do have a list of all of my grants. If you'd like to see, I can paste it in the chat.
Thanks, Lily. Yeah, feel free to paste that in the chat. Thanks for sharing. Cindy?
Sure. Well, I have extensive grant experience, both with my tribe, my prior career, and my last library, as well as my current. And so I always encourage everyone, when you are seeking a grant opportunity, it is so important to schedule as much time as possible for everyone to get together to draft that narrative. The more copy edits, revisions, the better, because that only strengthens your application. And on the other side, I'm also a grant reviewer for two different institutions. And so seeing the finished product, you can definitely tell when the appropriate amount of research has been conducted to strengthen that narrative and really paint that picture of why it is you are seeking that funding opportunity. Make it hard for anyone to say no. It's so important to include all of the details and be incredibly thoughtful. You know, a lot of times people will seek grants because they need the funding to supplement either their salary or their program. And then other times you get to as a way to create a new project or program or even service for your institution. So it's so important when you're looking at that to achieve that balance for yourself, especially because as we know, when you start out that grant writing process, you know, staring at a blank report or blank form or just a blank sheet of paper can be challenging. So I encourage you to not be intimidated by the start of the grant proposal. Just think of how you're going to submit that successful proposal in the end.
And
Go ahead.
And my experience was really sort of a stunted career moment where I thought I wanted to go into nonprofit management. This is way back in 2004. So I interned in DC and took a course at George Mason in grant writing and recognized that I did not like nonprofit culture, like corporate nonprofit culture is hardcore. And anyhow, saw the opportunity, like so many people, to go into librarianship, and it's always a serendipitous career. Well, for most people, it's a serendipitous career. That was also my story. And then when I became a librarian, first of all, if just taking a step back, that grant writing sort of muscle was put to work. When I was a student, every opportunity I could go for, every scholarship I could apply for, I did. And that really worked to my benefit. I ended with no master's in library science debt because I really just rinsed and repeat those application statements and asked my supporters and letter writers to make blanket letters, dateless, institutionless letters. And after that, when I became a librarian, I just applied for small grants, the Great Stories Club grants, which ALA, I believe, still offers with the Oprah Winfrey Foundation, a few other small grants, the local Children's Trust in Miami. So we just went for small slices, 5,000. We were just awarded a small mini grant through Elise, a collaborator and I, and it's just $500, but every penny counts. So my story is just writing small, and I was able to scale up after getting some practice. And I'll share my, well, let's see, right now, I think I have a few smaller grants, and then mainly, as Lily mentioned, IMLS grants across 3 different types, which I can talk to you about choosing maybe one type at a time, because when you have disparate kinds of grants where you're hosting a forum or maybe doing research also, and also maybe doing a proof of concept grant, you can feel really stretched intellectually. So I can also talk about foundation grants a little later too, but what's important to know is just start somewhere. And there's a lot of us who will share with each other. I think there's sometimes an attitude of let's protect our knowledge because we're competing for the same IMLS grant. We did the polar opposite. I remember Ray, myself, Africa Hands, Laverne, so many people, we got together and we started a grant writing sort of working group where we came in and we wrote and we shared ideas like, how are you attacking this? How are you and that's counterintuitive because we were all going for the same category of grant, the LB21 Century. And we all got it. So in this universe, I think some people would tell you, that there's a scarcity, but actually we supported one another. And I'm happy to share that every single person who attended, I think Ray, they might've been like 8 or 9, every single person who attended those working meetings got the grant. We really cross-pollinated and shared best practices with one another. So build community. I think the library sector, unlike the nonprofit corporate sector, is very willing to share resources. I'll stop there.
Yeah, those are great tips. I see in the chat box, people are sharing that great suggestions to start small, as Cindy mentioned, and Anna as well, and then searching for other resources where you're all working together. So I just want to see before we move on to the next question, if anyone else has a response to what was just shared. All right, we'll move on to the next question. What have you learned about the grant writing process? So all of you have shared a little bit about your background and then some thoughts and advice there. But in terms of something you didn't realize before, like something you should have known maybe as you're going through the grant writing process. We'll start with Cindy.
Yes, so many lessons throughout the years. Sometimes organizations will hire a grant writer and they come in and they interview a few staff members, and they seek to understand what the goal is. They draft a narrative, you may or may not be awarded, and then they only come back when it's time to compile documentation for the final report. That is a step towards not having a sustainable environment for future grant purposes. If your institution is small and you really need that strength in numbers, it's important that you're continuing to build that relationship with your grant writer, that they're a part of, if not monthly, at least a quarterly touch base, so that they understand, what information will strengthen that final report narrative, and that everyone understands what the process is. A lot of times with smaller institutions, we know we're small and mighty. We don't have as many staff members, or you might not have someone who is a skilled grant writer, which is definitely something that you should consider. You need a budget to support their salary to make sure that they can support your organization, and it's so important that you're sharing information and that it lives there. The other part of that is making sure that if you are contracting with an external writer, that you do have all of your files and you have access to that even after they've moved on. Oftentimes, smaller organizations struggle to find that historical information, and that's really hard to build upon that base if you only have whatever web pages remain post award. So it's something where when you're looking at the grant writing cycle, you have everything scheduled, you know exactly what needs to happen when your deliverables need to be met. So you're sharing that information with the team so everyone can provide you with access to that documentation. And as you draft that narrative, you continue to cast that wide net, make sure that all of the answers are in there. Everything that was a goal that was in the narrative needs to be included and highlighted. And if there were any changes, make sure that that's probably right at the top so that they can see that the monies were applied as intended and the goal of the project was achieved. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Cindy. How about Anna and then Lily?
Hi, yeah, sorry about that. Oops. I actually created a list, and I'll just go very quickly. Just make sure to choose the right program, as Cindy said, and just read the requirements. That may sound so basic, but I've made that mistake, and I actually have had more failures than successes with grants. And tangential to that, I would say really making sure that not just the program is the one that you should be applying for. That technicality cost me a grant, and I had to wait the entire cycle. But also using a grant logic model. There are grant logic models that you can use to make sure not to be metric-based or formulaic, but that you have a one-to-one match from the request for proposal and its mission to your outcome, and then to your assessment and deliverable. So that helped me too, to just make sure that because you really don't have a lot of real estate. The best case scenario, if you succeed and go on to the full invitation, you have 10 pages of narrative, and that's not a lot. If you're talking about a 3-4 year program, that's really not a lot of real estate. So you have to be concise. And then you also know your body of literature, just your area, the pond that you swim in, and the temptation is to overshare on that. There's ways that you can link out and like just include a hyperlink out from that narrative, because static PDFs can have a link, and then just being very judicious with what you write. So make sure you choose the right program, read the requirements, and be concise about how you're going to do what you do. And then Become a Reviewer, which has already been shared, you'll see examples of, you can tell sometimes the kind of, not to be negative, but pie in the sky. And this leads into my next point, which is don't over promise. You can tell when an application is just not realistic, and that might go back to the wrong program or the wrong application category. But make sure that you're not over promising a miracle, and then not also, number 3 is not asking for the support you need. So if you're going to need a program assistant, and because the grant funder or the foundation or whoever is giving you the money, they ultimately don't want you to fail, right? So make sure you have a core group. You can actually form that group of advisors maybe beforehand and keep that group of advisors on the project afterward, making sure to compensate them for their time. But the next advice that I would have is, if you're collaborating on a grant, make sure you've maybe worked with this person before or this group before. Don't let this be your first time being partners. Also scale up on that, maybe do one poster presentation at a conference, or maybe even do one outreach event together in your community. But don't let that be your first dance or your first time doing something together. You might find that it's not a good match, or you have different working styles. And a grant is an awful way to find out that you're not paired up well. There's a lot at stake. The last thing I'll say, which is kind of related to over promising a miracle at the front end, is then ballooning or runaway projects where you fall into mission creep. So keep a very lean scope, do what you said you're gonna do, and then execute that. It's very easy for your project to kind of take on a life of its own, especially if you have excess money at the end and you have to ask for a no-cost extension. Make sure your project is still in scope. You can always ask for, or maybe apply for, another grant that's adjacent to the one that you maybe are finishing, depending on the funder as well. The last thing I'll share, actually, this is relevant to the next question, so I'll share other advice about types of grants later. Thank you.
Well, I guess I'll just go ahead and start sharing. From my perspective, I have 3 things that I'd like to share about the grant writing process. First, I'd like to highlight the importance of collaboration. Having good collaborators really makes it easier to go through the grant seeking process, and also makes your grant proposal look stronger. I have had great collaborators over all these years. For example, I've been very fortunate to have collaborated with some wonderful librarians from Loyola Marymount University on the project called the Institute for Research Design in Librarianship, which was funded by Imls to provide research methods training to academic and research librarians. And Ray was actually one of the scholars that participated in this institute. And this partnership started from an article that I wrote about research methods education in library science. And Marie and Chris, the 2 librarians from Loyola Marymount, saw that article, and they approached me about applying for a grant from IMLS. And that turned into a great and long-lasting collaborative relationship. I think in order to find good collaborators, we really just need to be active professionally. Even if we don't have any specific grant idea at this moment, we may still encounter collaborative opportunities if we actively attend conferences, giving presentations, publishing papers or blog posts, going to networking events, and participating in social media discussions related to our professional interests and so forth. Just put yourself out there. So if we do do that, if we put ourselves out there, people will notice, right? And some of these people could be our potential collaborators, and that will lead to collaborative grant writing and even higher possibility of success in grant seeking. So that's the first thing I'd like to share. And secondly, I think it's important to have a good understanding of the trends of the funding priorities of the funders. For example, if you are interested in applying for an IMLS grant, it will be helpful to look at all the grants they funded in the past couple of years. And that will give you a pretty good idea of the topical trends of what they fund. And then you can frame your project in a way that fit the trends. And IMLS, all of their successfully funded proposals, they're all on their website. So you can easily access all those proposals and to look at their both their letter of intent, the initial submission, and then the more complete, the final proposal, so you can see how they did it. And that would give you really more concrete and specific idea of applying for a grant, how to compose your proposal. So if you already have a habit of reading journal articles, then you might want to add this into your list, into your reading list, to read successful grant proposals from funding agencies like IMLS, just to really give you a better sense of how it's done. And lastly, always plan ahead when trying to talk to program officers. Feedback from program officers is really important. It's a must that we talk to program officers before we submit any proposal. And their feedback can really give you a good sense of whether or not you're heading in the right directions. I myself have made the mistake of not reaching out to the program officer early enough. And there was this time I contacted one program officer not early enough, and then I got the auto reply because she was on vacation, and then I tried to contact others but just couldn't get hold of anybody before the deadline, so I missed that opportunity. So that really taught me a lesson to always plan as early as possible. And my university has put together a really helpful list of tips on how to talk to program officers. I'm going to share that in the chat, so hopefully this time it'll let me paste. All right, that's everything from me.
Great, thank you all for sharing. It's totally true. With every grant program, there's a program officer, and sometimes I know, like for IMLS, there's like a reviewer process, which is what was shared in the chat. And sometimes for the other grants, there are no reviewers, and it's just the program officer with the board. And I know about this through like Mellon and maybe some other ones. And so it leads to our next question, which is about grant opportunities. So we talked a lot about, all of you shared about your experiences with IMLS. And of course, people are familiar with NSF, the National Science Foundation, as well as Mellon, possibly. And Anna, you mentioned ALA. So are there other grant opportunities, and where do you find them? So we'll start with Anna.
Hi, yeah. So in our field, we are very lucky and fortunate on two fronts. First, we have a dedicated federal institution where the money trickles down. So, you know, pandemic relief and all of that trickles down. So IMLS has a good slice of money, and not all fields have that. So a lot of people in other academic sectors are competing exclusively for NSF grants or NHSA grants. And so we have our own federal institution. That alone gives you an advantage. And then within IMLS, there's so many categories. There's museum for Native Americans, museums sector grants for indigenous communities. And so I would say IMLS is where I turn to, but I have also written foundation grants, and there is a big difference. So foundation grants is a letter of intent. You are right, where it's not as democratic. And IMLS has to follow certain protocol because it's a federal agency, whereas these foundations are driven exclusively by the board, the CEO, who answers to the board. So because of that, there's a tight rubric, and that rubric may not always be broadcast. So it is a little bit of an enigma, but if they are an established grant funder, Carnegie or a lot of these organizations have actually been funding libraries for centuries. Mellon Foundation, Carnegie, and so many others, Russell Sage Foundation. And the letter of intent, there's a lot of examples. And so the foundation itself may not broadcast it, but people have created communities of practice where you may find successful letters of intent. I'll try to get my hands on some, but the letter of intent is not as scientific. It's not, it's more personal. And also you definitely don't want to be too positivist or too much of a researcher. They actually may not like that. So you want to center the community, and which is what librarians do actually. So I would say you really have to be personal and inject humanity in your foundation grants. And then there's corporate grants. That might be as straightforward as an application on the corporation or the company's website, which may not ask you for a lot. You still need to put just as much thought into maybe a Meta or a Facebook grant, as a Russell Sage Foundation grant, as an IMLS grant. The same sort of thought needs to go into it, but your style of applying needs to shift. And as far as how to find ALA or IMLS grants, they're very good at advertising this. And ALA actually has a dedicated site for all of its funding and grants. There's the Whitney, I think it's the Whitney Carnegie grant, which is for just building a bibliography, a new bibliography that the field needs. And that's $5,000. You may be onto a special niche that has not been curated bibliographically yet, and nobody has compiled that literature yet. You could do that. And so our field is good at saying we have this money for scholarships or for grants. And so pursue those. Then there's also databases like Pivot and the Foundation Center, because not a lot of foundations also, they don't advertise their grants. And this could be also celebrity foundations. And so you can look through the Foundation Center database and find opportunities as well. And librarians often have a lot of favor because public trust is so high. So that's where I'll stop.
Thanks, Anna. How about Lily and then Cindy?
Yeah, sure. I just sent through the chat the list of resources I put together as I was preparing for this question. So basically, beyond IMLS, there's a number of other resources. Anna had already mentioned some of those. You can check your state library and the professional organizations like ALA, ALICE, and also nonprofit organizations, especially your local nonprofit organizations like the California Humanities nonprofit, and they offer this library innovation lab grant for libraries in California. And then some library consortia also offer grants. So definitely check out your the library consortia that your library is part of and see if they have any grant to offer. Sometimes they also offer professional development grants for librarians. And then I would also say it will be helpful to pay close attention to funding opportunities announced on like listservs or on social media. For example, at our institution, I often receive announcements of funding opportunities on the faculty listserv. Or on professional email listservs, there might be such announcements. So do pay attention to those. And also when reading newsletters, articles, papers, if there's any mentioning of grant funded studies, for example, in published articles, there's acknowledgement, right? And to extend gratitude to such and such funder, I would look at, oh, who's funding this type of research? I will make a note of that. Over time, you will be able to develop a list of funders that are likely to fund the types of projects that you do. And also use resources provided by your own institution. For instance, at San Jose State University, we have an Office of Research and the Research Foundation. They have all kinds of resources to help faculty members go through the grant seeking process, and also they can help you identify grant opportunities as well. And then we have this other foundation, Tower Foundation, that works with faculty just to seek funding from private funders. So if you have a project in mind and you'd like to identify a private funder that's likely to fund your project, you can approach Tower Foundation. So we have resources like those. So if you work at an academic institution, I would encourage you to really explore all kinds of support systems and resources at your institution and take advantage of those.
So not much to add. They've done a good job covering here. But the one thing that a lot of library information institutions lean toward are the large federal grant opportunities. But I would also encourage you to look local and look small as well, because there are some passionate service agencies within your communities that would love to fund and support something that is in mission alignment with their organization. The other thing is to consider the private sector, like Lily shared. There are a lot of private corporations that love to expand their philanthropic reach, and they dedicate a certain amount of funding, sometimes specifically even to your region or our field as a whole. So it's something to consider when you're looking at casting that net. The other thing is, of course, I'm Dakota of the Santee Sioux Nation, so I remind everyone that we're sovereign nations, and not only are we still here, we're thriving, and many of the tribes in your areas, they also offer grant opportunities to support education and library services. So it's something to consider when you're looking at how can you find those opportunities. And the biggest thing I always look at with a background in marketing is always reading those press releases. When that announcement goes out, it's a celebration, of course, of the work that's going to not only take place and continue, but you want to look at supporting those institutions. And like we've all mentioned, building relationships, that's really where it starts. So also just networking within our own field and asking colleagues where they have found success. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. There's also this building on what Cindy shared. Somebody had shared with me a while ago that every private sector or organization will have some sort of education related department or some sort of focus, right? That's education. And that's where you can either find and identify, make those connections where they can fund some sort of initiative, because we're in general in the field of education. So it's kind of a nice opportunity there if you can make that connection. If it's not explicitly about libraries, but related to some sort of learning or education program that private sectors are interested in funding. And then let's move to this other question here. I know a few of you have mentioned a little bit about the part of not getting the grant, or and just wondering what sort of was the process about that? Like, have you not gotten a grant before? And so what did you do with that project? Like, were you able to still make it into some other project where you were funded and so forth? So it'd be great to hear from your experiences about this. So let's start with Lily.
Well, first of all, I'd like to share with you an article that I personally find very useful about how to handle rejection. It's an article from nature.com. And so basically, to summarize the gist from the article, there are three major takeaways. The first is if you do get rejected, and don't take it personally. It's kind of like, because we work in academia, we go through the process of submitting manuscripts and trying to get published. So we have already developed a really thick skin, and getting rejected, it's just part of the job, part of our daily lives. So, but if you're not used to that experience, so just really don't take it personally. Sometimes even the reviewers, they write harsh things on your proposal. Just don't take it personally. And then once you have the feedback from them, to look at their feedback and see whether or not they make sense, and see what you can learn from their feedback in terms of improving your proposal. One of the suggestions from the Nature article that I personally find useful was to get feedback on the feedback from the proposal reviewers, right? Because not all the reviewers have a good understanding of your project. They may give you feedback that doesn't make any sense. So once you look at those feedback, you ask yourself, is it because there's a real flaw in my study design? Or is it because I didn't explain this explicitly? So the reviewers, they have questions, they make comments like that. So at that time, you can bring your proposal to trusted colleagues and have them look at the feedback from the reviewers and tell you whether or not they think the feedback makes sense, or whether or not you should just change your study or just make the part of the explanation more clear. So get feedback on the feedback. That's a really good suggestion. And finally, just don't give up. I've done this many times. If my proposal got rejected, I would just try to improve it. I would try a different funder, or just try the next cycle. It's because we have different small grants at San Jose State University. If I got rejected from this one, I would try it next time with a different grant. So don't take it personally and try to improve it based on feedback, and then just keep on trying. Don't give up. Try the next cycle, or try a different fund. So that's the things that I'd like to share.
Thanks, Lily. How about Cindy and then Anna?
Yeah, so, we can't become disappointed, even though that time was spent. That's still an investment in our career and our overall knowledge base. So, you didn't really lose. It was an opportunity to improve your craft. And it's always nice when they provide you with feedback on what could have strengthened it, or, I know we all look at and see who did receive the award, so just looking at what their project scope was, maybe it was something that was more, not only detailed, but, more focused. So when you're casting that wide net and you're building that grant team, it's important, especially like Anna said earlier, to really build that team beforehand and make sure that everyone's aware of the goal and how they're going to support it, and make sure that those relationships are in place, so that when this does happen, it is a time to just, go back to the drawing board, retool that. Because remember, especially if it's a grant program that is reviewed, those reviewers change with every grant cycle. So there will be fresh eyes on it, and it's an opportunity to, just represent your case if that's something that you're really seeking to include in your program. The other thing is, sometimes, you'll be a minor role on the grant, and the organization that reached out to you to partner with them, they may have a different vision, and they may scrap it all together and say, well, we're moving on to something else, or we were awarded this instead, and that's what we're going to focus on. So again, we can't become discouraged. These are opportunities, and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. So, the big thing is always just making sure that we're focused on providing that work and that service to our communities, because that's the goal.
And this is excellent advice. I don't have much to add, except that in the year, or if you are reapplying, if you feel, I would really encourage you to reapply, actually. If you have applied more than 2 times the same funder, maybe to another funder. But if it's just been the first rejection, rinsing and repeating, it usually, yields success, I think. I hope I'm not misspeaking there, but I have been rejected, I said, and then usually I take that time, and because we have a core area, taking what you've spent time on and submitting it to a presentation or speaking about it somewhere. And then in that narrative, I showed, well, point to this is what I was able to do, or I spoke about this at this place, and there's not a lot of space to do that, but you can link out, you can say, as I shared at this presentation, blah, blah, blah. So there's things you can do to just still kind of buoy your spirit in the interim. And then as you're just kind of retooling that grant application, But all is not lost. And especially if you're still doing the same core work and it's a part of your core job description, and you can repurpose that and even expand upon it. For example, I work in the immigration space or in the HBCU space. So the work that I do with the Black Caucus is different than the work that I do for research. But those spaces changed wildly in the last 3 years for obvious reasons. And so when I haven't had success, the work still goes on, and I can see how it has grown or how some things have evolved as far as like how I'm thinking about things. And so just continue to improve is my message, and continue to persist, don't give up, and there's still room for your work.
All great advice. And this is something that a lot of folks have asked me, but also like I've seen some of the discussions that people are just like, how do you like psychologically like, you know, get through this? So it's very encouraging to hear, like, don't give up and persist and find other opportunities, as you all shared. And now it's sort of tying into any last sort of comments, tips, or advice for new folks applying grants, or anyone who's interested in applying grants for these grants, and anything else that you wanted to share that we didn't get to cover, it would be great. So we could start off with Cindy.
Sure, and thanks again, Ray, for bringing us together. I think we could probably talk another hour or two about grants because there's so much to it. Just to be clear, there will be tiers. Hopefully there are more happy tiers when you get funded at the end. But you know, when you're coming down to deadlines, it's something that's so important that you're keeping that as tight as possible. And I also encourage people, when you're drafting your narrative, have a spreadsheet on the side of that and write down every action item as a deliverable. Who will handle it? You know, what that timeline looks like. Make sure you have it on the budget as well for each quarter. And then, you know, your grant cycle year, your final report deadlines, making sure that all the information is there so that when we're dreaming big, we're making sure that it's smart focused, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely, of course, because it's something where, you know, we have all these good ideas and we have all these good hearted people who want to help, and everyone, you know, says, we'll do this and we'll do that. Well, someone needs to hold everyone accountable to that to make sure that those deliverables are met. So, you know, as in regards to new folks, just go for it. That's really, you have to have a place to start, you know, and no matter what the grant size, always seek assistance from your state library too. That's what they're there to do. Thank you.
Thanks, Cindy. Great tips. How about Anna and then Lily?
My last advice is just practice writing. A lot of us are writers and readers already. Make sure you're writing for a non-academic lay audience. And we are dealing with databases and scholarly literature, whether you're in public, school, academic libraries, special libraries. We can really strengthen that muscle of just distilling it down and making it so basic that anyone can take a hold of whatever your area is and get it. And just practice writing and writing in that way that anyone can understand your message. That's also cost me a grant as well. And then, you know, again, the second time around, I was able to just kind of pare it down, and that one was successful the second time around. So I would say just practice your writing muscle or strengthen your writing muscle, and you'll get there.
Yeah, I think those are really good advice from Cindy and Anna. I'd like to add that if you have no experience in grant seeking before, you might want to start with collaborating with someone with more experience. That could really help easing the anxiety in that process. If you have that opportunity to find a collaborator, that would be great. And also, secondly, just be as prepared as possible. I'd second Cindy's idea of creating a spreadsheet with all the tasks listed. So basically, the idea is that the moment you decide to submit a grant proposal to you'd like to pursue that, you are already a project manager. You're going to manage the grant seeking process as a project. So you look at the submission deadline and you work backwards from there to set all the dates for different things. For instance, at our institution, the routing process to get all the signatures would take about 2 weeks. So I working from the submission deadline. I know that actually 2 to 3 weeks prior to the submission deadline, I have to have my proposal finalized and ready. So, and then you go from there, and the tasks for all the members of your team, and then the dates for all of that, and how you're going to talk to people about your ideas at the initial stage to get feedback, how to improve your proposal based on those feedback, how to build their feedback into your proposal, and so forth, how to identify the friendly critics, and all of those tasks. Make sure that you have all of that, and then the proper dates for that, just to run it as a project. That will make the process a lot more smooth and efficient. Yeah.
All great tips, advice. Thank you so much, Lily, Anna, and Cindy. It was really, really helpful to hear how you approach applying for grants. And I think one of the key things is, as all of you have echoed, start small and then find like collaborators, right? Those are like really two points that for my experience is definitely resonates to be true. Like start with a small grant, and then you really understand the process, and then you'll be able to go for like those other grants that might be a larger sum, but obviously focused on maybe specific or different areas compared to maybe that smaller grant you were working on. So now we have Q&A time, and so I know there was a couple of questions that came in from the form when people were registering to attend this webinar. But as folks are thinking about questions, feel free to put in the chat box. I thought these questions were really interesting. We could start with this one. It's about, is it possible to share some examples of grant proposals? And I know it was mentioned earlier that, like, for instance, the IMLS has a directory, and you could see the ones that are funded and then the full proposals and even the preliminary proposal. I was wondering if anyone has any thoughts about getting examples of grant proposals.
You know what, Ray, when you brought up this question before, just through email, I was thinking, because we've actually had a pay it forward kind of culture, I thought about it. I was like, when BCALA got its big grant, we had actually asked Reforma for a copy of their grant package, and Tess gladly shared. And then Reforma helped BCALA helped APALA and CALA. So I was thinking maybe our NALCO organizations can have a repository of resources, because our members could benefit from it. I didn't act on it, but I'm thinking maybe we should ask the presidents if we can just kind of compile those examples for our members. But isn't that cool? Again, it goes back to, let's all, work together, and there's room for all of us. But I'd be happy to get that started afterwards. I didn't get a chance to do that before.
Yeah, great tip, Anna. Yeah, definitely. CALA has a repository, so that could be a one-spot place to put them in. Yeah, I couldn't have done it without your help. And then, of course, kudos to Reforma for like building that. And then we all were able to get some sort of funding from IMLS. But yeah, anyone else want to talk about finding example proposals?
Well, I'd say if you have colleagues that have successfully received grants from the funding agency that you intend to supply your proposal to, definitely use that personal resource to ask them to kindly ask them, of course, to share their successful proposal with you, and also the inner workings of the process. Because if you just look at the examples posted on the IMLS website, you don't really get the inner workings, like how they talk to the program officers and all the decision making that went into putting together that proposal. So if you have personal resources like that, definitely utilize those.
Thanks, Lily. So there is another question here that we received. It's about something we had talked about, but in case anyone else in the panel wants to chime in some more, how to best collaborate with colleagues in actually writing grants. So if anyone has any sort of more specific examples, I know Anna had shared earlier, right? So like collaborating on something else first and then trying it out. And Lily had mentioned definitely that collaboration is key.
I can go. It's really important to blend someone who loves wordsmithing with someone who has that financial eye and is looking through that lens, because when you can bring them together, that really strengthens that narrative and helps move the process along a little bit more quickly. You know, some people, they just want to edit, they want to review, and that's great too. But really trying to balance that on the team, I think that that's something that really helps craft that strong narrative.
Great. I don't see any questions in the chat, but we still have a couple of questions that were sent in advance. Another one is about program officers. I know Lily had mentioned this earlier, but wondering if others have other thoughts to chime in, which is, would you please also talk about program officers for your grants?
Yeah, this is another one where if you're in the same core area, you're going to build a very strong, I guess, relationship with that person. And so they will be accessible to the extent that they can be, but really be strategic in how much you want to ask or how you frame your questions, and make sure you come very prepared for your meetings with the grant officer. It's usually just a sliver, like 20 minutes, 30 minutes. You can email them, but it's going to be delayed kind of predictably. And so once you get going and you start like querying them, it may even be a good idea, and they encourage you to send your document ahead of time or include it in there when it's good, or whatever the little platform is called. I don't remember. But it can be a livable document or living document. You can have comments within it and specific questions that you have. They do read over it. It's their job to read over it, quite frankly. But your time is very valuable. Their time is also very valuable. So have a very clear plan for what you want to accomplish in that meeting. And then moving forward, kind of like a professor, read the syllabus, right? After it, knock on wood, if you're awarded the grant, make sure you're going through the toolkit on how to manage your grant so that you're not wasting the grant manager's time, because you're going to need them for setting out fires. During the pandemic, we had to go to Sarah Fuller several times, like, can you help us? We had a national forum grant where hotels are supposed to honor the force majeure clause to cancel things. And anyway, IMLS can help with certain kind of contractual things. And because we had a good rapport and we had read everything and we were on top of what it actually entails to manage a grant, we knew exactly what kind of support to ask for. We also tried to handle things like on our own and with, legal counsel. And so I would say, without diving into too much of that or divulging too much, it is really important to have a very clear understanding of what IMLS expects of you, whatever agency expects of you in handing that grant before and afterward, so that you're not wasting the grant manager's time.
Great, thank you, Anna. I think we are at time. So again, thank our panelists, Lily, Cindy, and Anna, for just sharing such incredible advice and opportunities, and really, really want to thank all of you for just making the time today to share your experiences with all of us here. So thank you all for attending. We are going to wrap up here, and